Hey guys, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040 in the house, bringing to you yet another awesome yet crazy theory. And today I'm going to be talking about my theory on how I would bring Aquaman into the Arrowverse. And I'm a little bit surprised that this has never come up in conversations much, in terms of which DC heroes could appear in the Arrowverse. I mean, we've seen lots of others, but Aquaman has hardly ever come up much. I mean, there might be some videos out there that talk about the possibility of Aquaman appearing in the Arrowverse, but if there isn't, I would like to be the first one. So with that all said, let's talk about how we could bring Aquaman into the Arrowverse and how this could be pulled off. Ever since Aquaman made his debut in issue 73 of More Fun Comics back in 1941, Aquaman has had a very long and up and down history in terms of the way he's been portrayed. Aquaman has been at times the butt of many jokes, especially where Family Guy and Simpsons and even Robot Chicken is concerned. And Aquaman, in my opinion, is one of the most important characters in the DC universe. I mean, he's there for a reason, and there's been good versions of Aquaman, and of course there's been stupid ones. So let's go through his history. Aquaman made his first appearance in 1967 as part of the Filmation series with Superman, and it was called the Superman Aquaman Hour, and Aquaman had a number of episodes / shorts to himself, and a lot of his stories were very basic. They were nothing special. He didn't really fight any big name villains, and it was okay for the time. And he spent a lot of his time underwater, no pun intended, and that was okay for the time, as I said, but nothing to get your teeth into, so to speak. But as I said, not a terrible cartoon, but it was okay. He then made his next appearance in Super Friends, and not to be horrible to Aquaman, but his appearances in the show made him a bit useless. He would only be there with the Justice League if there was a situation where he would have to be underwater, and I was never really a fan of that, in my opinion. I didn't really like that, because if there was no situations with water, Aquaman would be pointless just having him there. So that side of the show I was not a great fan of. But when we get to the 90s, things start to get a little bit better for Arthur Curry. He made his next appearance in Superman the Animated Series as part of the DCAU in an episode called A Fish Story, and Aquaman was very different to how he was in the past. He wasn't really what you would call a heroic character. I mean, he still kept the same iconic look, orange shirt and dark green pants, but he was more of a villain, so to speak. He was more like an underwater king, and he tried to declare war on Lex Luthor and the humans about people polluting his water and things like that, and it was quite a good episode. I remember me and my friend watched that episode just a couple months ago, and it was one of the better versions of Aquaman, and he wasn't what you would call Superman's buddy, so to speak, as you would always see in past episodes of Superman, where heroes would team up with him and they would automatically become good friends straight away. But Aquaman was not what you call a nice guy, so to speak. So that version was quite cool. I enjoyed that one a lot. Aquaman would make his next appearance in the Justice League Animated Series in 2001 in an episode called The Enemy Below, which was a two-parter, and this was a very good episode, and they completely changed Aquaman from the ground up. He had long hair, he had a long beard, and he was like a full-on warrior / underwater king, and later on he had like the hook for a hand, and he was a real gruff, badass sort of character, and this is probably my favourite version of Aquaman. And the way that he lost his hand in that episode was very powerful, because I seem to remember in the comics, I mean, unless I'm wrong and someone corrects my trivia, I seem to remember a group of piranhas chewed up his hand, which never really made sense to me, because if you're an underwater king with the power to communicate with fish, you would have just told the piranhas, don't eat my hand or something. But that version was quite silly. But the version that they went with in the episode Enemy Below was really good. He sacrificed his hand, no pun intended, to save his son, so that was really good. I enjoyed that episode a lot, and he would continue to make many more appearances in the animated series, but he was never really like what you would call a team player, so to speak. He was just there to help them. But I think Aquaman did eventually become a full-time member of the Justice League, and as I said, that version of Aquaman is my all-time favourite, because if you're going to have a guy who lives underwater, you know, I expect him to be very strong and very powerful, because this is a guy who could command and control the entire ocean, and that's a guy I would take very seriously. But, you know, as I said before, we've seen a number of versions where Aquaman was portrayed as very silly, but as I said, that version from the DCAU is still my favourite to this day, and rightly so. He's awesome. Aquaman would make his next appearance in Batman Brave and the Bold, and yeah, this version of Aquaman is pretty forgettable. I mean, he's funny, don't get me wrong, but he was mostly stupid in this series, and kind of reminded me of the Super Friends, but not in a good way. I mean, even the version of Aquaman in Super Friends was much better than this, but as I said, it's okay, but it wasn't one of my favourites of the character. And Aquaman would also appear in Young Justice for a few episodes, and they kind of went back to more his badass roots, where he was more like the underwater king and ruler of the seven seas, so to speak. So this version of Aquaman in Young Justice was cool. And his next appearance he would make is in Justice League Throne of Atlantis, which was more of a DC original animated movie, which I have on DVD, and it's pretty decent. I thought it was pretty good. I mean, it's a follow-up to Justice League War, and this one I think was a little bit better than Justice League War, in my opinion. Now we go to live action, and a lot of people probably may not remember this, but there's probably a lot of people who do. There was a Aquaman Pilots, which was going to be intended for a live action TV series, and Arthur Curry was played by Justin Hartley. Now, I've never actually seen the pilot. I think I've seen a trailer of it. It just didn't do it for me, if I'm honest, and that's nothing against Justin Hartley. I loved his portrayal as Oliver Queen / Green Arrow, but yeah, this portrayal was pretty forgettable, really, and very, very generic. It just, Justin Hartley looked more like a pretty boy than a superhero, so in a way I'm kind of glad they didn't do the Aquaman TV series and we got Smallville instead, which turned out to be a hell of a lot better than the Aquaman pilot. Imagine if we got the Aquaman pilot into a proper series. Good God, that would have been really, really bad. So as we move along here, Aquaman made his next live-action appearance in Season 5 of Smallville, and he was played by Alan Ritchson, who would go on to play in Titans many years later. And he was kind of like a hybrid of the character. He looked more like the Super Friends version, where he had the short blonde hair and the big white grin and the chiseled physique and the orange shirt and the green pants, but he had more of the recent version attitude, where he wasn't always a team player and he wasn't very heroic at times. This version, I didn't mind it, but it wasn't my favourite because to me he was just like another Justin Hartley. Justin Hartley 2.0. It was like having two Justin Hartleys on the show. But he was okay. I had no problem with him. And we move on to the DC Cinematic Universe, where Aquaman made his big splash, no pun intended, / debut on the big screen, and he was played by Jason Momoa. And Jason Momoa, in my opinion, is Aquaman. He embodies everything that I want in the character and more. Big guy, chiseled out of stone, muscles in places and most people wouldn't even have places, just an all-round badass, and that's exactly what I want for Aquaman, and that is exactly what we got. And I loved the movie, I enjoyed it, it was a lot of fun, and I'm really excited for the sequel. And I'm a big fan of Jason Momoa, and I loved his work in Game of Thrones, and he was the perfect guy to be casted as Aquaman. And I'm not knocking on others out there, they probably would have done a good job, but Aquaman, when I look at the comic books and I look at Jason Momoa, he looks exactly like him and exactly how he should look. So yeah, that's probably my favourite version of Aquaman. I would put him up there with DCAU and the more recent comic books. And yeah, what can I say really? He's awesome. That version is absolutely incredible. And now for my theory on how I would bring Aquaman into the Arrowverse. At the end of Crisis on Infinite Earth's crossover event, we saw Sarah Lance, Black Lightning, The Flash, Superman, Batwoman, Supergirl and J'onn J'onzz officially come together to form the Arrowverse's Justice League, although they're going to be portrayed more as the Super Friends, if you're going by the way the crossover event ended. And one of the first things that popped up in my head was which other DC heroes could join this team, and one of the first names that came up in my head was Aquaman. Now the big question is, how do you bring someone like Aquaman into the Arrowverse? I think the way you do that is you bring Aquaman into the next crossover event, and how I could do that is, for the crossover event, Luthor is testing out a number of weapons underwater, and it causes to hit an underwater city, and that underwater city is none other than Atlantis. So as a result of Atlantis getting destroyed or damaged, this could spur Aquaman to come out of hiding and declare war on the people above, or as he calls them, the surface dwellers. And while this is all going on, you could have Starro make its escape. So Starro will be the main villain for this crossover event. I'm not a great fan of Starro, but Starro is one of the more important DC villains for the Justice League. So Starro will be the main villain, and while Starro makes its escape, everybody is trying to stop Aquaman from making a bigger mistake, and you could have Aquaman versus the Justice League for maybe half an episode or half of part one, or depending on how many parts this crossover event is going to be. So while that's all going on, Starro makes its way to the surface and starts controlling people to try and release an army of starfish, and maybe even control a couple of Justice League members, or maybe even some of the Justice League's friends like Alex Danvers or some of Jefferson's family, or any of those guys really. So, or even J'onn J'onzz himself, maybe even control J'onn J'onzz because he's a telepath. So you could have that going on, and Aquaman reluctantly agrees to work with the Justice League to stop Starro from taking over the whole world, and puts Lex Luthor on notice that if you ever try to attack my city again, it won't be my people who come for you, it will just be me with my hands around your throat. And once Starro is defeated, you could have Starro is sent back to wherever it came from, and I wouldn't necessarily have Aquaman join the team. I would have him say, well, I'm not a team player because I still have a lot of business to take care of underwater. But if you ever need my help, give me a call. And in that way you could have Aquaman as an unofficial member of the team, and he's made his Arrowverse debut. So there you have it, guys. That's pretty much my theory on how I would bring Aquaman into the Arrowverse. Is this how you would do it? How do you think you would bring Aquaman into the Arrowverse? You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and leave your thoughts and comments down below. And I will see all of you next time. So till then, take care everybody and stay safe.